Hi, I'm Patrick Farley. I teach fourth grade gifted at Crystal Lake Elementary in Martin County. So that's in South Florida on the East Coast.
Hi, I'm Marianne Canuso. Our Empatico Fellowship, I was working with a fifth grade class of mine. It was a class called Global Awareness, so fit in perfectly into our curriculum. I teach in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, at a school called Norwood Fontbonne Academy.
And the reason I joined this Empatico Fellowship is because before they released the fellowship, before I even knew it was a thing, I had started to hear a lot of really great things about Empatico and like all these amazing experiences that other teachers were having with learning about other parts of the country and even the world and their kids developing empathy because of it. And I wanted to be a part of that. And I'm actually really proud to be in a district where social emotional learning is at the forefront, and we do have programs for empathy, but I also feel like empathy can be a little convenient to, sometimes when you live in a community where everyone lives in the same setting, maybe comes from similar backgrounds and similar life experiences. I think in order to really develop empathy, you have to be exposed to people who have, yes, some things in common with you, but of course, some drastic difference from you and some different experiences for you to really be able to understand and connect with people from a different background than yourself. So that was a big motivator for me in joining this program, was to connect my kids with people from another place in our country. And we were really happy to get a class from Philadelphia, because it's a different part of the country, like much different weather. And so what we got from that was not only some geographical knowledge and empathy about how they deal with winter, and teaching them about like what it's like down here, but we also learned a lot of things we didn't expect to learn. So for example, my partner here works at a private Catholic school. A lot of the students in my classroom did not know what a Catholic was. We live in an area where it's mostly Baptists and denominations more similar to that. So they didn't know what a Catholic was. They were confused about why kids would be going to a private school, because even though we do have private schools in our community, they're not as prevalent in this town as they are in some other places within our country. And then it was fun because one thing that I know the other class learned about us was that in our area of Florida, a lot of families that live here are like first generation. Uh, they're from Pennsylvania, or they're from New York, Ohio, Michigan, so on and so forth. So that was cool to see some of the similarities that the kids had in like the sports teams, for example. I know Mrs. Canuso's class was like shocked by how many Eagles fans we have in our class. We have way more Eagles fans in our classroom than we have Dolphins fans and Jaguars fans combined. So I know that was fun for them. Um, it was also really fun to hear about like what those kids do for their different like vacations that they go on, as opposed to what we do here. And then also just checking in with them throughout the winter, because living in our world down here, it's like, okay, yeah, sure, we go outside for recess and this, that, and the other thing. And then we kind of forget about our friends up in Philadelphia, and they're like, oh yeah, we went on a field trip and it was 40 degrees and it was miserable. And it was like, oh my gosh, like that's wild, because we were just talking in our class about how we need to stay hydrated because of how hot it is. Um, so that was really cool. And then getting into our actual projects was very interesting too, because we do have like some homeless population here in Martin County, but not a lot, and it's not super common that you would see it on a daily basis. So we learned not only that our Philadelphia friends don't live in downtown Philadelphia, because that was a concept that was new to my kids as well, is like downtown city versus like the city limits, that sort of thing. But Mrs. Canuso's class focused on homelessness in their community. And so my kids had a ton of questions about that, questions about homelessness, questions about how often the kids saw homeless people and their interactions. And we got to hear a lot about how it was really normal for students in Mrs. Canuso's class to interact with homeless people whether it was seeing them on the streets and giving them food and money, or it was like volunteering in shelters. For them, that was a normal thing. Whereas here, I have kids who do a lot of volunteering, but with working with homeless people isn't something that really is a major opportunity here. And then even some of the other issues that came up in both of our classes, my kids were able to learn a lot from Mrs. Canuso's class. A lot of my kids thought that pollution in Philadelphia, people would have a much different perception of it because it's a city. A lot of my kids thought, well, it's a city, they probably don't care about pollution and the environment because they live like with buildings and sidewalks and streets. But then they found out that, you know, people care about pollution there too. And then my class focused on beach cleaning for their project. And one of my favorite things about that whole process was not only being able to teach Mrs. Canuso's class about things, but then also some of the ways that my kids got challenged. So for example, one of the students from Mrs. Canuso's class asked us about red tide. And a lot of the kids in my class froze and they're like, wait, what's that? But that's a thing that happens down here. And my kids weren't totally aware of that. So someone else from like the outside, so to speak, asking about our community forced us to go and then do research about our own community, our town, our environment, our ecosystem, and all of that. So it was really cool to not only learn about Philadelphia and to teach people about Martin County, but then to be forced to step up and learn about our own community.
Yeah, we really learned so much from each other in our connections throughout our Empatico fellowship. Um, the reason I had entered or hoped to be accepted to the fellowship a few years prior, and for whatever reason, I wasn't accepted. So I kind of put it on the back shelf, and then I saw an email come through again. So I thought, well, let me try again. This is something, empathy and kindness is something that is so important to me. And our school, being a private Catholic academy, we do have a big service component to our curriculum. Every grade level goes on service projects. But I thought for them really to look within themselves and to challenge themselves to how do they see others, and in what way can they show kindness to people, in their community and even outside their community. I thought building this empathy, my students, most of them are, very fortunate. It is a private school, so their parents are paying for that. So they, financially, my students and their families are pretty well off. So I think they do get this sense of like doesn't everyone live this way? Doesn't everyone go on these awesome vacations during spring break? And sometimes I want to like crack into their little world and expose them to some things, beyond their own area and their own lifestyle. So that's one of the main reasons I looked into getting into the fellowship. One of the awesome benefits that I found from the fellowship this year was when my students did the surveys. Well, first we had that class lesson where they had to come up like, what are the challenges in your community? And the kids came up with minor things like, people don't clean up after their dog, or it was such trivial, more trivial things. So I thought that was so powerful for them to ask others about their community. Patrick?
No, yeah, I was just agreeing with you on
Oh,
that. That for me, was those interviews they had to do in the community. They came back with some really cool stuff.
yeah. And I thought when they asked their parents more than, the students themselves were looking at, not just maybe your neighborhood, like you were saying, our neighborhood is more, even though it's in the city limits, it's more of a suburban kind of feel. But if we broadened our scope to include the entire city of Philadelphia, their parents looked at the community needs a little differently than the students, or a lot differently than the students. And that's when we came up to, we had really a tie of gun violence and homelessness. So for gun violence, what our project was, we were doing persuasive writing in language arts and ELA. So we wrote some persuasive letters to our new chief of police and the mayor, and the students expressed their concerns about the gun violence continuing to rise, and gave some ideas for solutions, which we had to do a few lessons on that and build some background knowledge. But as far as our work with the homelessness of Philadelphia and the people and how they could help, one of the main ways we decided to help was to do a collection. I have a friend who works at a homeless shelter in Philadelphia, in Center City, and she came in to speak with the students and told us a lot. I mean, the students were glued to her and glued to the conversation. It would have been cool, Patrick, if your class could have joined us for that. We really should have done that. Even though it wasn't your project, I think your students would have learned a lot, as mine did. Having the connection with Patrick's class was really awesome. And like he had said, with the differences in like kind of urban to suburban / rural, coastal, really was interesting for our students. And I know when we first were meeting, you were talking about the hurricanes and how that's something like we experience here and there, but not to the extent that you do, being further south and on the coast. And when we connect with you, your students were wearing shorts and short sleeves, and it was like 30 degrees out. So I think just understanding that this is like our lives are going on simultaneously, and we have to understand not everyone is living in our community. We need to have a broader scope. I think our students learned, and I think you would agree with this, that like coming away from it, we all care about our communities. We're all passionate about, and I think students just naturally want to do this at this age level to help, find ways to help. And then the differences I would just say was like the differences, as you explained, with the communities of, your students, not realizing the urban issues and the homelessness and the gun violence that my students, hear about and perhaps see on a daily or weekly basis. Most importantly, I think what my students learned is that we can all help. We all can make a difference. We can all spread empathy and kindness. You don't have to be an adult. You can find ways to help. And I always love that quote from Gandhi: to be the change you want to see in the world. So awesome. They have the power.
So I wanted to share a funny little thing with you. So you're just mentioning the hurricanes. So when all this like Corona stuff started happening and people started like going shopping and buying everything, people in Florida were like, whoa, this is so much easier. It's like a hurricane, but we're going to have electricity, we're going to have running water, and we don't have to shut up our house. So for like in Florida, the joke was kind of like, this is normal for us, only easier than usual. I did want to add on, because I know you got into some of the specifics about your project, and I didn't with mine. So I know that I mentioned that they were focusing on beach cleanup. So their actual project was more environment-based than it was people-to-people based. But my kids learned so much about empathy through the Empatico activities that were pushed out to us. But then also, again, like the interactions with your class over and over again, like learning what it was like there. And then again, even some of the similarities they had. And then as far as our beach cleaning goes, we never got to do it because of the Corona outbreak. But I'd say the biggest thing my kids learned from the process of developing their plan, even though it wasn't like a real people-to-people activity, it was more of an environment-based activity, was the concept of organizing, brainstorming, gathering materials, connecting with people in the community to figure out the best way to go about doing it. Because for us, that was a really big deal, where the kids at first were like, yeah, well, just go do it. And then it's like, okay, details. And by going through that process, we did decide that instead of like kind of organizing our own beach cleaning, that we were going to join a pre-existing organization And we talked about how if you were a single individual joining an organization, they're happy to have you. But if you're having like 18, 19 people join an organization at the same time and communicating to that organization, there's 18 of us, and we want to bring our parents, and we want to invite our friends, then all of a sudden it's like goes from this like small contribution to you become a really big stakeholder in the organization and what they're doing. So that was kind of our journey. And unfortunately it got cut short because the kids were so excited about it. But yeah, it was a fun journey, and I had a great time with your class, Mrs. Canuso, and getting to know some of the kids in your class. And I know my kids enjoyed you.
Same. We had a great time, and they always look forward to our Wednesday morning connections. Yeah, we didn't get to follow through on our plan, and we were just starting to implement our collection of toiletries for the homeless shelter that we are going to support. But I think we can still, keep it in our mind, and hopefully maybe next year those students will be in 6th grade. And maybe that's something that they can bring to their religion classes or their service projects. And I hope your students, Patrick, will look like this summer when the beaches are open, and they can look for those community cleanups. And I think they'll be more open to, show up for those.
Yeah, we do plan on continuing the conversation over the next month, even though we can't meet in our school building.
Same. Well, it was a pleasure working with you, Patrick, and I hope we stay in touch.
Absolutely.